In the time to come, morals will degenerate to an extreme degree. It is essential that children be reared in the Baha'i way, that they may find happiness both in this world and the next. If not, they shall be beset by sorrows and troubles, for human happiness is founded upon spiritual behavior. Abdul Baha. The subjects to be taught in children's schools are many, and for a lack of time, we can touch on only a few. First and most important is training in behavior and good character, the rectification of qualities, arousing the desire to become accomplished and acquire perfections, and to cleave unto the religion of God and stand firm in his laws, to accord total obedience to every just government, to show forth loyalty and trustworthiness to the ruler of the time, to be well-wishers of mankind, to be kind to all. And further, as well as in the ideals of character, instruction in such arts and sciences as are benefit, and in foreign tongues. Also, the repeating of prayers for the well-being of ruler and ruled, and the avoidance of materialistic works that are current among those who see only natural causation, and tales of love, and books that arouse the passions. To sum up, let all the lesson be entirely devoted to the acquisition of human perfections. Abdul Baha.
So today we're really happy to have Ms. Ridvan Idara with us, and she'll be talking about how to raise children who embrace the oneness of humanity. Ms. Idara is the founder and executive director of New Era Creative Space, a nonprofit youth educational center whose mission is to inspire stronger communities through creative programs. NECS envisions strong communities that are vibrant, thriving, self-sustaining, and diverse, where young people are active agents of positive change, are enabled with the social emotional skills to enact change, are empowered to take on leadership roles in their communities, are able and excited to nurture the next generation of visionary leaders. Guided by the belief in the oneness of humanity, Ms. Idara has spent over 2 decades creating opportunities for young people to discover their unique strengths and talents and empower them to work towards their highest potential. Ms. Idara is an artist, educator, occupational therapist, and parenting coach. She has 2 adult children and resides in Peekskill, New York, with her husband. She derives her spiritual inspiration from the writings of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. She loves traveling, meeting, and learning from people of different cultures, hiking, reading, and playing tennis. So with that, I'm happy to hand it off to Ms. Idara.
Thank you so much for having me today again. I'm going to share with you what little knowledge I have, and really to just share some of the work that I do as the bio. I mean, I'm guided by the teachings of Baha'u'llah, and really the oneness of humanity is what the Baha'i faith is founded on, this concept of the oneness of humanity. So me personally, it's just been a lifelong journey of trying to understand what that means. And as a parent, I've always had this question of how do we raise kids to embrace the oneness of humanity? So, and also in the work that I do with young children, because I'm surrounded by young children every day, and we have a very diverse community of children. How do we impress upon them, to love one another, to see each other as one human family, especially in a world that is so divided? During the devotional, it's the prayer was talking about there's only one God, there's one religion, there's one man, but humanity has created these divisions. We divided the world into these, nations, and we divide ourselves by religion, we divide ourselves by nations, we divide ourselves by races, by gender, by class. We constantly find ways to divide ourselves, and it's hurting us. So today I'm just going to share with you, I'm going to share my screen, some of what I have gained from the writings of Baha'u'llah, and in raising my own children and working with children on a constant basis, some of the themes that come up. So here is, can everyone see my slide?
Yeah, I can.
All right, is that good? And I have to kind of position, give me a second. technology. I have to position my computer so that I can move the slides out. So I'll start with this quote from the Universal House of Justice, which is the governing body of the Baha'i religion. And this quote was written to the Baha'i world in, actually, no, this is by the National Spiritual Assembly, the body, governing body of the United States. And this quote I've been using a lot because it really stood out to me when it came. So to create a just society begins with recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it's not enough to simply believe this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act and to view all aspects of personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And it requires the participations of Americans of every race and background. But it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge. So this idea of the moral imperative to act, it is not enough to believe in the oneness of humanity. It is not enough to to say that we believe in the oneness of humanity and then just let and not act and not show it in our behaviors and the way we engage with one another, in the way we engage with our neighbors, in the way we raise our children. Because if we are not intentional about going about bringing about the oneness of humanity, then we let the forces around us, especially when raising children, the forces around them will influence how they think about the world and how they act towards one another and towards of the world. So the oneness of humanity, all the Baha'i writings, right? This is a core principle, this oneness of humanity. And like I said, I personally, it's been a lifelong journey to try to understand this. So this is from the Baha'i.us website. And I thought it was important to share. So there are spiritual and there are social components to this idea of the oneness of humanity. So the spiritual components is, first of all, recognizing that we're all created from the love of God, right? And that the soul has no gender, race, ethnicity, social class, all these things that we choose to divide ourselves, to see to other people. Was created by humanity and not by our creator. And when it comes to diversity of the human race, we can discern with the eye of oneness his glorious work, handiwork. Now, if we look at the world of humanity, it's not just the world of humanity, in fact, all of creation. The beauty of creation is the diversity of creation. There's diversity in the natural world. We see it all around us. There's no tree that is alike. Even trees of the same species, they're not alike. Then human beings, that is what makes humanity beautiful, is this diversity. And diversity is seen throughout all of creation. Divisions, hierarchies, inequalities, based on any of these groupings, gender, social class, it's entirely man-made, right? And so then it is up to us really to remodel, and we have to be really conscious about this and intentional about, how do we remodel this world so as to create a world in which oneness of humanity is seen. Now, the social components of the of oneness is we are one family, we are one human family, right? And we have prejudices of and superiority and complex or patronism. I can't speak right now. Are contrary to oneness, right? All forms of systemic exploitation, right, are contrary to oneness. We know that this is man-made and it's contrary to oneness. It's what keeps us apart. It keeps us othering people and apart. So developing a deep-seated consciousness of the oneness of humanity is really the only hope, for us, humanity. If we go the way we're going, we already see that it's tearing us apart. And what are we, those people who are concerned about the state of the world, what are we going to do? And we really have to be conscious. We go back to the first, there's a moral imperative to act. Abdul Baha says, regard ye not one another as strangers. Illumine and hollow your hearts. Let them not be profaned by the thorns of hate or the thistles of malice. Ye dwell in one world and have been created through the operation of one will. So now to the topic that we're talking. So I just wanted to give a little context for, thinking about the oneness of humanity. And so as a parent, as an educator, this question is always, it's not enough to believe in the oneness of humanity and say we're good people, we're raising our children to be kind, we're raising our children to be helpful and to love one another, and that's good enough, because it's not enough. Our children are also being socialized, and the question that I always ask myself, raising my two children, is how are they being socialized, and what can I do to counteract that socialization of our children? So children are there are various channels in which children are being socialized. We have family influence children, but we also have peers, we have the schools, and we have media. Media has a strong impact on children, especially in the world we live today with social media. And children have access to media from a very young age. They're not, unless we, are raising them in a vacuum, they go out into the world, they hang out with peers, they are in the society, and they're making, at their minds, they're observing and they're making decisions about the world and about each other. And so it's very important that we think about how our children are being socialized. So as family influences, right? We as parents, caregivers, educators play a significant role in shaping, our children's understanding of the world. So it's really important as educators, as parents, as people who come work with children, that we're thinking about our influence of that. What are we modeling to them? What are they seeing in the way we are behaving, in the way we are, acting in this world? Media is today media is really has a strong hold on our children, and media portrayals of different impact children's perspectives, right? I love this quote because that's from Malcolm X. If you are not careful, and this was before the social media. Imagine that was just newspapers, right? Today we have social media. We have kids going to friends' houses and they have phones, and they have access to all kinds of things on the phones. If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. So media has a really powerful way, and social media, not just social media, all media today is really skewed in one direction. What media is always, is often, popular media is often portraying images that really could be detrimental to our kids, and their minds are like taking it all in and making decisions about the world. So if we are not intentionally counteracting that, then I was reading somewhere that Ibram Kendi, in his book How to Raise Anti-Racist Kids, talks about how if we are not intentionally socializing our kids by talking about race, by counteracting media, we are essentially raising racist kids. because the mind and the way they're being socialized is going to have an impact on how they see the world, especially if they're like living in neighborhoods, that does not allow for interaction with people from other races. Then everything that they're getting in, they start to make decisions about the world. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. The school environment, what are they teaching our children in our school? Or what are they not teaching our children in our schools? A lack of representation and awareness may perpetuate biases and misunderstandings. So it's really important that we are, looking at what it is that our children are learning, even in schools, or what they're not learning from schools, and how can we balance that out? Peer interactions, children learn from each other. Community and society, messages from community leaders, from religious institutions, cultural events, these all, influence their perceptions of the world. Books, what books are they reading? What books are we exposing them to from a very young age? What toys are they playing with? And even, at a very young age, children are learning and they're taking in information, right? Children may encounter racial and cultural themes through toys, through games, through activities, through books. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what are some of the ways in which we as educators can think intentionally about how our children are socializing and being socialized, and how can we counteract that socialization? So I just came up with some ideas, and there are many ways, and maybe later when I stop talking, people can share some of the ways in which we teach children to embrace this oneness of humanity, encouraging children to understand and share their feelings of others, promoting kindness. So last time when I spoke, I talked about how to raise children of the kingdom, and one of the ways we do that is to teach them these virtues, right, of kindness and compassion and justice. What does justice look like in the classroom? What is having conversations with them, cultivating cultural awareness, exposing our children to diverse cultures, traditions, and perspectives through the books that they're reading. In America particularly, it's, our nation is pretty whitewashed, right? And we and by that I mean, representation is always from a white perspective. That's the default. So what are children, for me, for instance, for my children, it was very important for me to expose them to, people of heroes and peoples of different cultures, so that they can see that, expose them, and, intentionally look for media that's celebrating diversity, that's showing people, especially people in the minority, that is showing them in positions of leadership, right? So that my kids would get, a more balanced view of the world than what our media shows us. Encouraging inclusivity, teaching our children the importance of inclusivity and being really intentional about it. And the best way to do that is, to create spaces and environments in which different children of different backgrounds, cultures, religions are working together and being together. I do a lot of this through the work that I do with children in my organization. Talking to children about race and, not just race, any of the isms. Help children understand the importance of treating everyone fairly and with dignity. I mean, really being engaging in those courageous conversations with children about why is the world the way it is? Why is it that media portrayal of Black men, for instance, is the way it is? Why is it that so many, talking about George Floyd when it happened, or even now, the treatment of people of color in the media in the world, this world. Having those conversations with our kids, and of course, we can start at a young age. It can be by exposing them to, you know, to different cultures, books, through engaging them with people of different cultures, emphasizing cooperation and collaboration, you know, teaching the value of working together to solve problems and to achieve common goals. It's really important that we become role models. We are role models because children, we can talk about, you know, we can talk about the oneness story of blue, but if we're not living it, our children, you know, will pick up what we do more than what we say. Right. And so being a positive role models by ourselves, embracing the principles of the oneness of humanity. And by like, who are, you know, take an inventory. Who are you hanging out with all the time? Who are, you know, who are your children hanging out with all the time? How are we exposing our children to different races? Because the thing is, when people start to live together and work together and we become a family, then it becomes, that's when the moral imperative to act, because I cannot live to see my brother, you know, my white brother or my Mexican brother, or I can't watch them hurt. Their hurt is my hurt. When we become a family, and the only way to do that is to be in proximity with each other, to socialize together, to, you know, to live, work, and engage together with people of other backgrounds and religions and get to know them, so that the misunderstandings around cultures, a lot of the fears about different cultures, all of those will start to dissipate when we work together, when we live together, when we share together, right? Then we get to, then we truly become, you know, brothers and sisters, and work towards the fair treatment of all people. Encouraging curiosity and questions, right? Creating an environment where children feel comfortable asking questions, right? Instead of not talking about things, really getting into these conversations. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it takes courage. Sometimes it's, you know, it's uncomfortable having these discussions. And I talked a little bit about exploring history and heroes, teaching children about historical figures of different races, gender, different religions, you know, championed, you know, look at these people who champion the oneness of humanity, and have worked towards equality and justice, emphasizing shared values, right? Focusing on our common values and traits that connect all of us, you know, such as kindness, compassion, desire for happiness. You know, all human beings, no matter where we're from, we have the same desires. We hurt when, you know, our children are hurting. We, you know, when we skin our knees, when our children skin our knees, they cry. This is like common all over the world. But we also share common values. And understanding that and having those conversations with our children. Storytelling is a great way to share narratives that emphasize unity and cooperation amongst people of different backgrounds. And, you know, introducing our children to positive role models from diverse communities. Volunteering and community service. I mean, I can't say how important it is to, you know, engage our children in community services, and, you know, in different communities, like identifying issues in our society, in our communities, and then together with our children, because I think it's really important. One thing I loved when I was growing up that my mother did, that I value and carried into my own parenting, was she took us everywhere when she did service, community service. And we got to meet people from, you know, different, in Nigeria, it was more about class, and it was more about tribes, right? Tribal differences. And, you know, just going as a child, you know, being brought along with my parents to all of these different communities where we could have been, where we were of service, was really, really stayed with me all my life. And with my children, you know, it's something that I do, because when you volunteer and you engage in community service, you can build empathy for other people. You can get to know other people and build empathy for their for what goes on in their lives, right? We build empathy. We can't really. It's challenging to develop empathy in a vacuum. It's when you're in people's spaces and volunteering and community service is very it's I can't say enough about it, but also just a little note that when we volunteer and we enter other people's communities to serve, to enter in a spirit of humility also, because I think often people who want to serve other communities, especially communities that have it less resources or are more challenging, we enter with this attitude of savior. And many of these communities do not need saviors. They are undersourced. But that doesn't mean they need us to come in there and tell them how to be. But rather, if we enter with a humble posture of learning to learn from them, because they really have the solutions to their problems. So it's very important that when we serve other communities, that we do it with humility and with a humble posture of learning, because we can learn a lot from them to addressing stereotypes, having open discussions about stereotypes and biases, and teach our children to question and challenge them. And I keep coming back to modeling, because if we are constantly questioning and challenging biases and stereotypes, our children will learn from watching us do that. If we are standing up for the rights of others, our children will watch us and start to emulate that in their lives, right? And it's very important to question our biases and where those come from, to constantly be reflecting on our biases and practicing inclusive language, right? So that we are not, we can avoid generalizations or derogatory terms related to race, ethnicity, culture. Learn about other people's cultures. Like if we're going to, I teach culturally responsive teaching here in Peekskill, because we deal with a lot of children from different diverse backgrounds, and it's really important that our staff understand culture. Because, if we're seeing through the lens of one culture, our biases will cause harm to children from another culture, because the way some cultures carry themselves might be confusing to someone from another culture. So it's very important that we understand culture. We learn about people's culture, especially as we interact with them. And, and if we're genuine and we can ask people about their culture with humility to learn about their culture, so that we can do better in how we approach being with them, then we can begin to form these bonds of unity that can grow. And our children, of course, are watching this. So addressing racism, in my writings, it says racism is one of the most baneful and persistent evils. It is a major barrier to peace. Its practice perpetuates too dangerous a violation of the dignity of human beings to be countenanced under any pretext. So when we about, race is a big issue in my life, because I experience racism on a daily basis, and often it's not explicit, it's very implicit. People are not even thinking about, about it. It's a lot of it is subconscious. And the reason I spoke about socialization is because we live in a culture that has had hundreds of years of intentional propaganda really against Blackness. We live in a nation that's, has, and in the world really, where Blackness is a thing, and if we are not intentional about rooting it out from our society by starting these conversations early with our children, because if we don't start these conversations with our children, they are learning from the world. And what they are learning from the world is one race is better than the other race. And they're learning by, looking at media and making their brains are making decisions and categorizing people and things. So it's really important to start this conversation early. In Black communities, we don't have a choice because our children at as early as kindergarten, preschool, are already being discriminated against and treated a certain way. We know that in preschools in this country, Black children, especially Black boys, are more likely to be punished. And as they go up in grades, they are more likely to be sent home, to be put in detention, and this is research, right, that shows us this. So we have to start talking with our children, to our children about race to protect them. So I think it's very important that people of other racial backgrounds start to do the same, so that we can cultivate an understanding of justice and fairness, what's fair and what's not fair, and why certain people are treated a certain way, so that our kids can we can begin to undo the socializing that's happening on a daily basis. Develop racial cultural literacy, right? Learning about and respecting others, studying and talking about the histories, the experiences of groups that we call whatever groups, African American, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, all of these groups, to start to learn about their histories and the experiences of these groups. Being honest with our children in age-appropriate ways about oppression, about bigotry. And because I talked a little bit about children are amazing at noticing patterns, right? Including racial patterns, like who lives where, versus in what neighborhoods versus other neighborhoods, helping them make sense of these patterns and recognize that bigotry and oppression are sometimes a big part of those explanations. Our country, so much of our country here in America, so much of there's, systemic racism. It's in every system, our educational system, our healthcare system, any system you can think about. Racism is rooted in these systems. And so it's really important that we are having those conversations, but it's not just having those conversations, really acting to counter these narratives that are happening, active in our jobs, in our workplaces, in our schools, challenging these systems, these institutional systems that perpetuate racism in our society. Really, if you don't know what implicit bias means, figure out what implicit bias means. That's a whole, topic on its own. But implicit bias, also known as implicit prejudice or implicit attitude, is a negative attitude of which one is not consciously aware against a specific group. So unlike explicit bias, which are conscious and overtly expressed, implicit biases operate at a subconscious level and can influence our thoughts, feelings, behaviors without our awareness. They can shape our perceptions, judgments, and decision-making process, leading to unintentional discrimination or favoritism towards certain groups. I see this all the time, implicit bias just playing out, a lot in so many institutions, in the way I personally am treated in the healthcare, when I go to, when I go to the hospital, when in the school, I noticed implicit bias very early on. My son was in preschool. I ended up pulling out my children both from the school system and homeschooling them till fourth grade, because of the biases that they were being, teachers without even, nicest people. But because they've been socialized a certain way, and implicit bias has such a strong hold on us, that I noticed that my son was being, who's curious, loves asking questions. And yes, like any child, in preschool gets into trouble, but he was being punished for these behaviors more so than, children, other children. And I personally, my husband and I felt like, in order to kind of, and we were fortunate enough to do that. Not many people, most people don't have the luxury to pull their children out of school and have one parent, homeschool the child. But the reason I'm sharing this is because I noticed it. I noticed in the way my child was treated in school. We have such a thing as school to prison pipeline. And it's a term, sadly, that has been coined in the society because the research shows that the treatment of, Black kids in schools kind of prepares them because it's leading to the school to prison pipeline. We punish them, we take them out of school, we expel them, we, put them in detention more so than any other group. I mean, what does this do to the emotional, the spiritual, and we're constantly breaking their spirits and telling them, sending a message to them that they're bad, they're not worthy, they're not good enough, they're not worth, putting effort into, helping them with whatever challenges that they're having. So I share this because I think it's really important that we're constantly reflecting on our own biases, right? And we can, in our different institutions, whether we work as educators, as doctors, as in the corporate world, wherever we are, that we are intentionally, we are looking around and seeing, what is the representation in our workplace? How can we diversify it? How can we create a more diverse, a more fair system within our different groups, as opposed to just letting things be and doing nothing about it? Because it's easy. It's easy to just go to work and come back home and not worry about, what's going on. So we have all, white people in my organization. Why should I bother trying to because I'm getting paid, I'm going home. But I really feel like if we believe in this concept of the oneness of humanity, we need to, in our different workplaces, make sure that, different voices are at the table, right? Different representations that are at the table. And if we're not doing this intentionally, which is why I started with that quote, the moral imperative to act. So we can say we believe in the oneness of humanity, but if we don't act to change the forces that are keeping us separated, then that's something that we have to question in ourselves if we really believe in it. Man must recognize the oneness of humanity, for all in origin belong to the same household, and all are servants of the same God. Therefore, mankind must continue in the state of fellowship and love, emulating the institutions of God and turning away from satanic promptings. For the divine bestowals bring forth unity and agreement, whereas satanic leadings induce hatred and war. And this is from Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, which I highly, highly recommend. We must learn to care for one another across all boundaries and borders, and build a movement of movements rooted in a love so fierce that when a Mexican child is ripped from the arms of his mother at the border, and when a Black child is ripped from the arms of her mother as she's arrested on the streets of New York, and when a white child is ripped from the arms of her mother in a courtroom in Oklahoma, we feel the same pain, the same agony, as though it were our own children. So I think to get, there is a quote that says that there should be such oneness, and I'm probably paraphrasing it because I don't have it on the screen. There should be such oneness that when one cries, the other feels his tears or tastes his tears. When we start to be in proximity with each other, when we start to eat with each other, and really get to know people of other cultures and work together and be intentional about having people of different cultures, hearing their voices and hearing their struggles and seeing differences as a beautiful thing, and not, not ascribing to this idea of color blindness, right? We're all the same. I don't see color, but rather seeing color and seeing that it is that beauty of the diversity of the human family that needs to be recognized, and that we need everybody's voice at the table. When we start to do that, we will, there'll be such love that this quote from Michelle Alexander will ring true for all of us. Someone else's, that is to me personally what the oneness of humanity is about. When we feel the same pain and agony as if it were our own children, when we care enough about each other. And I think when I think of the Baha'i writings and what Baha'u'llah is teaching, is trying to tell us about the oneness of humanity, I think that is at the essence of it. And I will end with this quote from Baha'u'llah, which says, "O children of men, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your heart how ye were created. Since we have created you all from the same substance, it is incumbent on you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, to eat with the same mouth, to dwell in the same land, that from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest. Such is my counsel to you, O conquerors of life." And with that, I will stop and open it up for, thank you for talking now. Open it up for questions or comments, and I'd love to hear what other people are thinking, or ways in which you promote the oneness of humanity.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so if anyone has questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Like, do you want to share what are some practical things you could do with a child, like let's say a young child, that could help them start to gain this awareness of the oneness of humanity?
I mean, some of the stuff that I brought up the socialization is really important, right? So like the books that we are, reading and sharing, it's really important, exposing them to people of different cultures, different foods, but most importantly, just creating spaces or finding ways in which to have them interact with children of different cultures. I think that's the most important, because when you're with other people, some of the stereotypes and the prejudices start to dissolve, right? And you can begin to see our commonality. You can't. It's harder, of course, if if we stay in our separate spaces. It's very hard to personal interaction being with other people is really key. But if people are not able to do that, I don't know, depending on circumstances, exposing them through books, through stories, through, different foods or whatever we can do to just show them. I talked about showing, figures, historical figures or present figures, people of different races, and so that they're not just getting just one race of people, right? Being our heroes, being representation matters. And I think it's really important that we make sure that that's happening here. How do we bring this message to schools or after school programs? That's a good question. I'll just talk about my organization, so New Era Creative Spaces, the organization that I run. And some of the ways in which we address this issue is working with our staff to, talking about these issues with our staff, talking about being culturally responsive, learning about understanding different cultures of our children, learning about implicit bias. We're really intentional about how we are talking about this. So we have regular staff meetings opportunities to kind of reflect on some of these topics. So that because of my organization, for instance, we are hired by our school district to run programs in the schools. And so we do after school programs in the school. So I think it's very important to we work with our teachers very intentionally, because they're going to be, our schools are a large Hispanic Latinx community. And then we also have a lot of Black kids in our school. So just making sure that our teachers are kind of trained and prepared to work with this community. But more importantly is the recognition of the nobility of each child, regardless of race. And I talked a little bit about this last time I spoke. That's another thing that we talk about a lot. We kind of like reflect on with our teachers, the nobility of each individual human being. And that as we approach children with that in mind, so their behavior does not become who they are, but rather separate from who they are. They are noble, and they were created with potential by our creators. So it's really important that our teachers understand that and bring that forth in the way that they communicate with our children. But as far as the schools are concerned, I mean, if we can, be part, if we have children, especially like at PTA meetings or whatever, like what are they teaching, challenging our schools to have more diverse books, find out what our children are learning and see if we can be more active in encouraging representation, right, in our schools. And there may be people here who have ideas, but those are some of the ways in which we approach this. And having conversations. I mean, in the past, I remember when my kids were little, we used to have, I used to have like spiritual parenting groups where we parents get together and talk about some of these issues and think about ways in which we can, in our homes, in our community, we can kind of encourage this oneness. So those are some of the ways that I can think of off the top of my head. And if anyone has suggestions, please, you can raise your hand and just go ahead or hop on to the next question.
The next question is, in Florida, the new Black History program will teach that slaves learn valuable skills while enslaved. So obviously very sad. Do you have any comments on that?
I think the only comments I have, like I've been saying, is that we have to be more intentional about making sure that we share the history of country with our children, and the children that we have. Sometimes they're not our children, they're children that come into our spaces, right? To share, to tell the truth about the history, and not to be really learn about the history of this country and not to be gaslighted into thinking that that's a true statement. A lot of people believe that slaves learned valuable skills while being enslaved. A lot of people also believe that slaves were lazy, right? And I can't even believe, I can't imagine how we let these narratives, ring true, or how we can get gaslit into believing that this is so. If you go to Alabama and to the Legacy Museum, which I've been to twice, and watch the stories of the treatment of slaves, and I was in Alabama just a few weeks ago, and it was over 90 degrees and hot. I was cranky just standing out in the sun. I could see myself getting impatient, and I'm sorry about the quality of the sound, but I'll try to speak up more. I found myself being impatient about just being out in the sun and to see the images of the slaves, and the treatment of the slaves, the images of how they were treated, and that they were working out in that sun for hours, many times without having food, being lashed by, and hung. And I mean, the treatment was just like, unbelievable. It was really heartbreaking to read about the treatment of slaves. And then to say that they were learning valuable skills, right? And for people to believe that and not question that, I think we really have to question and teach our children to question the narratives, because, there is a pushback of truth telling that's happening in this nation that's really sad. And I think it's imperative that we tell the truth about what happened, because it's only through telling the truth that can we get to justice. Can we then get to unity, right? So it's really important that we counteract this narrative that's going on throughout the country. More so in Florida, but in many parts of the country. I saw that in Alabama too.
It looks like that's all of our questions. So thank you so much. This was a really interesting talk, and thank you for answering all of our questions. Well, our speaker next week will be Robert Stockman, and he'll be talking about the gift of understanding. So I'll put the link to our mailing list and YouTube channel in the chat if you're not already subscribed. Thank you, everyone, and see you next Saturday. Bye.